In this video, we're going to talk about animation in Cinema 4D. So we will see how we can basically animate anything in this software. So we can also create some interesting effects using some particular cameras that we have at our disposal. We can animate objects and cameras along paths and create like walkthroughs and fly over your architecture like a drone or something like that. So we can basically do anything that we have in mind in Cinema 4D. Anything that we saw so far concerning the creation of the objects or the various parameters and the generators, deformers, environment, cameras, lights, anything can be animated. And also we have some advanced tools that will help us to create more advanced animations, but for that it's gonna take longer and you will have to explore and study a lot more. But in this video, let's start as usual from the basics, and I'm gonna talk about the theory behind animation. And this is really important because you can then manage your animation properly. So first of all, the first topic that we're going to talk about is the keyframes and interpolation frames. So usually when we create some, let's say, classic animation, we have to create each single frame that we want to insert in the animation. So each single movement or character needs to be designed and draw, and then we have to place in a sequence the different images. This is what are the frames basically. Now keyframes are those key moments in the animation, so are the most important part of our animation. Now fortunately, when we work in 3D animation or 3D software, we don't need to create each single frame, but it's the software that is gonna do that for us. Now this is an example here. So the red balls here are the keyframes. Everything that's in between, or also called the in-between frames, that can also be called interpolation frames or interpolation of that object. So it's like when you're creating a spline, you define the spline by adding some points. In the same way, you are defining an animation of an object or any other element in the scene, not by going frame by frame, but just adjusting the keyframes, which are the most important parts of the animation. Now, the other key concept is frame per second. Frame per second is how many frames do I want to insert in 1 second of animation. Now, depending on this parameter, the animation is going to look more fluid or less fluid, but usually when we want to achieve the basic for the fluidity of the animation, we can set this to 24 frames per second. Now, of course, if we use the 60 frames per second or 100 frames per second, we will have better results, but you need to understand that each frame that you're gonna render is gonna be a rendering. So it's like 24 frames for 1 second means that you need to render 24 renderings to create 1 second of animation. And 60 means that you need 60 renderings for just 1 second of animation. So if you do like 10 seconds of animation or 10 minutes, just multiply that value there for the seconds, and you will understand that you will need a lot of work from your computer, and this is really heavy for your computer, especially if you don't have a really performing computer. So be careful about that, because we saw that even just one rendering can become really heavy. So if I multiply that for these values, it's gonna be really hard. So it depends on your machine and your power. And then we have resolution. Resolution is another important value because it will increase or decrease the size of the video that you're going to produce, or the image that you're going to produce as well. And you have now 2Ks, 4Ks, which means a lot of pixels. And the more you increase the resolution, the better will look your video animation or your static render image, but it's going to take more time and again more power from your computer. And finally we have the shutter speed, which is well, you can achieve from the shutter speed settings the blur of the motion. So this is called the motion blur effect. And you can do that with the shutter speed, or you can also apply that separately. And this is something that you usually see in animations. You can also create this effect in After Effects. And well, another tip is that it's really important to understand that you cannot do everything in Cinema 4D, or it's gonna be a little bit heavier than doing that in, for example, After Effects or Premiere Pro. So you can set up your animation here, but then you can like work in post-production and defining everything else in Premiere Pro or After Effects or similar software. So let's start here and let's see what we can do in Cinema 4D. Now, first thing we can do is check the project settings. So we will go here into mode and go to project. And this is where you can set the project, so the project scale and other parameters, but especially here in the time, this is where we need to be, where we can define the FPS, so how many frames per second I want to do. So let's say 60, okay? And down here you have the timeline that is gonna be changed accordingly to the parameters that you insert here. So for example, you can say, okay, I want to do an animation at 60 frames per second, and I want to do, for example, 1200. So you can see here I have a longer timeline. Or I can say, no, I want to do 24 frames per second and just want to do 10 seconds of animation. In that case, I will need 24 frames. And you can also see here where the indicator is. So this is the CTI, this purple rectangle is the CTI, which means current time indicator. And it's gonna show you frame by frame everything that you have here in the timeline. So you can click here, slide this on the timeline, and you will see the animation. Well, of course, in the timeline you have the classic player buttons. Now, sometimes you can see the animation preview in real time here. And if you can see it in real time, it means that you probably have too many effects, or the textures are too big here in the preview. So you can decrease the texture size in the preview. And also you can see this is a TV screen. And here I have placed a video material and not just, or actually a video texture, not the standard image texture. And I will show you how to do that as well, which is pretty easy. Now you can see how everything comes together. And now the other important part is to go here in the settings. Now when we need to export an image, you will need to set up all these basic output, and this is the resolution here. So if you want full HD, you can set this to 1920 for the width and 1080 for the height. But you can also change this, customize it. You can do this 2K, 4K. Just remember, more pixels you will add, more time it will take. And also the resolution, well, for the screen, 72 is good for the resolution, and you have all this other information here. Now the most important part is the frame range. This is where you decide what you want to render. If you want to render just one frame, which will be your current frame, so the one that you are right now, in my case I am at 198, and then you can decide if you want to render